Welcome back, friends, family, and fun. Today we're going to be talking about one of the best written characters in Genshin. Now, honestly, you may look at this video and hear what I have to say and never take my opinions into account again, but you gotta hear me out on this. Like, you gotta place your complete trust in a stranger. Which you shouldn't do, but anyways, this character honestly surprised me with how well his writing was. Like, at first I hated this dude and his character completely confused me, but after looking into it a little bit better and analyzing his character a little bit better, his writing it's definitely up there with some of the best written characters in Hoyoverse. And you may be staring at me in disbelief, but I have to say that Rerir, one of the 5 centers, has some of the best writing in Genshin. And honestly, you may be staring at me in disbelief, as this is a guy who offed half of his wife's bloodline. And I know, trust me, I don't like the guy. I really don't like the guy. But I gotta admit, his writing is definitely good. So without further ado, let's talk about it. Now, before we get into his backstory and breaking down on why he's really like such a well-written character, I want to give a quick overview as to why I think he's a good written character. Now, starting off with, his character is consistent. Now, consistency is one of the top things that make up a good character and what has good writing, but his consistency is so interesting to me, as he doesn't have a big personality switch, and he has good build-up as to what made him slowly lose his mind and become a sinner in the first place. Another thing is, we can also see his humanity still intact and why he has this mindset of why he made these terrible decisions. Although they are not completely justified at all, we can see why he was making decisions and have a good look inside his head. And I really like this, as we can see that he's been a bad person from the start, and he wasn't just like some good guy that had like some type of trauma that happened to him and just made him instantly an evil person, but instead, we actually see that he's always been, not inherently a good person. And there's also a lot of great symbolism with Rerir and what we can see in the story, and it perfectly aligns as to why and how he became a sinner. And finally, since he is a villain, there's a lot of things that make up a good villain, but something that I really like is when villains have sympathy and not like just completely like just dawn on evil. But we can kind of see his sympathy through his backstory, but obviously he doesn't tap into it. He kind of justifies what he does in his own head, and it makes him a villain because, he's always been inherently bad, but he wasn't completely off the rails. But those are some of the reasons why, as to why he's like such a good written character to me. So now let's fully get into his backstory and start breaking down a lot of good things, or not a good thing, well, not good. You get what I mean. Let's just get into his backstory. Rerir, known as the racher of Solnari, was a Conjuring officer who was tasked with the dreadful duty of taking out the Crimson Moon bloodline. And while he was carrying out this task, he felt a deep sense of guilt in the back of his mind, but he repressed it. Rerir had a fiancée named Tholindis, and his love for her was deep, and he had a sense of commitment to her, but obviously that commitment wasn't deep enough, since, he was kind of her family, so obviously their love wasn't that strong. Anyways, Tholindis reciprocated this love, and she didn't really care that he kept secrets. She just wanted a life with him, and was willing to do anything to get it. But no matter what they did, their love was bound to fall into tragedy, as Tholindis prophesied. But the king that Rerir was serving was corrupted, and disaster struck, obviously, and in an attempt to save the one person he truly loved, Rerir gave in to the greed of the Abyss, thus concluding Rerir and Tholindis' story. But what really makes this tragic story so unique to me was how egocentric Rerir really was. He acted on his own behalf in a pursuit of a basic, quiet life, but obviously this is unattainable considering his job. I mean, he was serving a corrupt king and taking people's lives almost every single day, and going through the papers of the people whom he, But since he was still human, he still felt a deep sense of regret lingering in the back of his mind, but like I said, he repressed it, so he convinced himself that what he was doing was for the good of Conria, to give him that sort of peace of mind. But even then, his conscience was slowly eating him alive, and he began to doubt himself. And we know he wasn't completely oblivious as to what was really going on, as he was incredibly smart, and he knew King Ermin was in the wrong and wanted to protect his power, as he felt slightly threatened by the dynasty. Now, at first glance, you may think it's devotion to his king, but really, it's just devotion to himself. Rerir killed numerous amounts of people, but what made him gain sympathy was finding out that Tholindis was of the Crimson Moon bloodline. Finding out he's unliving his fiance's bloodline doesn't make him stop, but it does make him tap into his conscience a little bit more and let a little girl go, but again warns her that if he finds her again, she won't be as lucky. So obviously he was really dead set on keeping his position at his job, as So obviously he was dead set on keeping his position at his job, and he doesn't put a full stop as to what he's doing, but he kind of risks it, kind of due to his humanity still intact. But even then, his job is more important than several lives, innocent lives, because of how badly he wanted a happy life with Tholindis, a quiet life with her.
What becomes of someone who kills on another's behalf? Can he ever find true peace?
And honestly, I really love how Hoyle didn't turn him into a sociopath or a psychopath, but put a light on how people justify dirty jobs like these. I mean, they satisfy their own consciences by telling themselves what they want to hear, so they can feel better about themselves and what they're doing, and essentially keep the money flowing. But again, this is shining down on Rerir's greed, which dawned down on him as how he became a sinner, since the Abyss is filled with greed. And another thing that I want to point out was when Danslif was in distress about losing his brother, Danslif, he called out to people whom he thought were his companions for help, and Rerir agreed to help for two reasons. Rerir primarily agreed to help because he wanted to hear what Tholindis had to say and see if there was any way he can change his fate with Tholindis. That's the main reason why he wanted to go help Danslif. It wasn't just because, oh, his friend is in need of his help, but really it was to satisfy his own, problems that he had.
I will find you. And then you can give me your answer.
But even then, he did still want to help Dane, so he did risk his life and his job to go find out answers and kind of help Dane, but again, he was really thinking for himself in this moment, a life for him and Tholindis. And after hearing this, Tholindis went into the portal that would tear her literally apart, then making Rerir completely lose his mind and deciding to give into the greed and become a sinner.
Rerir.
Tholindis.
Through and through, Rerir's character was made to be selfish, and all, if not most, of his actions were filled by selfish greed. Now, I think, and this may be a stretch, I think Tholindis was kind of the opposite of Rerir, as I think she primarily was made to be representative of generosity and altruism, but at the same time, she was excusing his actions as she knew what he was doing, and since she was a part of the bloodline, she knew that he was getting rid of innocent people, so that made her bad by association and really shows a light on how toxic relationships like that work and how their love was really bad, and as how Tholindis prophesied, they were not meant to be together and he probably should have found someone else. But I think Tholindis was made out to be like a good person from like an outside point of view if you don't really know what she was excusing. So I think I kind of like their dynamic and their contrast between those two characters. But since he loved her so much, she slowly began to rub off on him, making his final act a desperate attempt to save her, putting himself in danger. Now, you may think, oh, this was a good action of his as he was finally putting himself in danger, but this is where his greed comes back once again, as Rerir went up to accept the Abyss's power to become a sinner. And not only that, he abandoned Khaenri'ah, the very thing that he convinced himself that he was protecting, putting a light on his mindset of he only goes after what he wants. Now, I think he primarily represents the sin of greed from all of his actions. I mean, this is what the Abyss took advantage of when offering him power, which is impeccable writing to make him represent one of the 7 deadly sins. But you could also say that Reindaughter is a sin of greed, because wow, Reindaughter is... That's just greed, but also I think Reindaughter falls more into lust, but yeah, just wanted to point that out. But after that, Rerir was lost, and then he came back. But Rerir found himself and built himself back up from manipulating the Traveler by impersonating someone they love, as love is something that'll make you do anything, as he is a victim of it. So even though he was completely lost, he still kept his mind, as he was incredibly smart, yet he was severely ignorant. But the very thing that destroyed him, which was love, made him whole once again. Rerir came back as an empty shell who was haunted by the name Tholindis, and all of his humanity was gone, and what would remain was the dark side of Rerir, who wanted power to get what he wanted. So Rerir was completely evil, and the person he was primarily clashing with was Columbina, which I think primarily represents light. You know, I think because, you know, Moonlight and Columbina, I feel like she's like more like innocent. We don't know too much about what she did in the Fatui, but I think like, you know, she has a lot of innocence with her, so it's kind of like the opposite of like light and dark, so I kind of like that little dynamic going on there. But the last interesting thing to me was what Rerir saw before he was sent away once again and completely lost the battle. And the last person he saw before being sent off was Dane. Now, the writing was so good here, as the last time Dane and Rerir saw each other was when Rerir walked past Dane, completely betraying him and not even giving him a look, even though I said that's the last time they saw each other, but you get the point. Rerir completely walked past him, disregarding anything of what Dane was saying. He just walked like he wasn't even there, and all Dane did was feel betrayed. And the next time they see each other, Dane held the portal open, betraying Rerir, even though Rerir betrayed him first, and Rerir, we can see the look in his eyes as his past actions come back to bite him once more. Now, a small thing that I want to talk about is him going after Columbina, as she represents one of the moons, and we know that moons represent life, death, and rebirths, which was what Rerir gone through, and I know it's like a stupid thing to point out, but it was really cool to see like all these like small mini things to make up Rerir's character, and these are all the reasons why I think his character is so well written, as there's so much symbolism that went past Rerir, and his character was so consistent throughout the entire, you know, backstory and what he was doing when he came back in Notcry, and honestly, his character, I absolutely loved it. The writing was completely impeccable, but thankfully this isn't the last time we'll see Rerir, as, you know, he was sent outside the border of Tevat, and we know the person who handles the borders of Tevat is Alice, and she's going to become a playable character, so obviously we're going to see a lot of Alice. So obviously Rerir's not completely gone for good, as I think he'll return during the Conria arc, not during Shineznayo, and I'm definitely not thinking Notcry, as the new villain of Notcry is the Thorai, as I talked about in my last video, which you should definitely go watch if you haven't. But I just wanted to talk a little about Rerir and how nicely written he was, as he was a really interesting character for me. So thank you again for watching this video, and if you haven't subscribed, you should totally subscribe, because if you haven't, that's kind of messed up, since we're just kind of here talking, and yeah. But any thoughts or comments that you have on Rerir's character, or if I've missaid anything, or if anything was wrong, please let me know down in the comments. And of course, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I'll see you guys in the next one, right? Hello? Hey. I'll see you in the next one, right?